G'day guys, and today I want to share with you all some thoughts I've just encountered regarding the nature of a city. What is a city? Let's get a solid definition for it and that sort of thing. Because it's not something we often think about in contemporary society. We just think, oh, cities, they're everywhere. We think we have a pretty solid concept of what a city is based on, the constant intuition that we garner from them based on constant exposure. Because I think about half the world's population lives in cities, so it's a very common thing we don't think about very much. And I think it does bear thinking about because of what I'm going to share with you in this video today. So I'm getting these ideas from Dante's Inferno, the first part of his Divine Comedy. Now, before I actually read into the book, and I picked up the Penguin Classics edition, which doesn't just contain the text itself, the translation, it contains the original text, so you can see the very interesting rhyming structure. It also contains a commentary at the back, sort of breaking each chapter down and explaining the ideas and stuff behind it and presenting it in a more simplified version. Obviously the translation can be a bit anachronistic in its use of language and that sort of thing, but it also contains at the start about 50 pages a preface which goes into the context behind the novel, or the play I should say, the Divine Comedy, getting that mixed up. Because obviously this work, along with any other work, doesn't just come out of nowhere. It's a product of context as well as personal talent on any author or artist's part. And it's very interesting to read out how the Inferno was very much a product of political turmoil. So where Dante was coming from at this time was 13th century Florence, which is a province, a city-state in Italy back in the day. And around about that time there was a lot of turmoil. It was seeming to me like, much like we're going through today, Florence was becoming quite a consumeristic society. There was a lot of banking and lending and commerce, and people becoming focused on material goods rather than, say, the rational principle, divine ideas and that sort of thing. And there was also political turmoil as various political factions were maneuvering and coming into open conflict over who they were siding with, whether they're going to ally with the Pope or the Holy Roman Empire. So there was a lot of turmoil at this point in time, and that's obviously where this Divine Comedy has come from. And Dante uses it to sort of point out the follies of his contemporaries, condemning them to the various circles of hell and that sort of thing. And one of the people that he condemns to hell, despite his obvious love for this person, is someone called Brunetto Latini. Now, I may be butchering that pronunciation as I always do, but let's just work with what I can say. So Dante places Latini within the third ring of the seventh circle of hell, which is the circle of the violence against God, nature, and art. So we have such things as sodomites and blasphemers down there. Now that's pretty damning, despite his love for him. He speaks, obviously, how he was a great influence on Dante and that sort of thing. And like Dante, Brunetto Latini was a sort of statesman, great political thinker, interested in civics and that sort of thing, sort of the way society was running and this sort of thing. And in the commentary to the Penguin Classics edition of the Inferno, it includes a very interesting quote regarding the definition of what a city is, and I'm just going to read it out to you here. So Brunetto wrote in one of his works, "A city is a coming together of persons as one to live according to reason. Citizens are not those who simply live in the same community, surrounded by the same walls, but those rather who are brought to live according to the rational principle." Now this is a pretty interesting definition to me. Now why is that? It differs quite a lot to the other definitions that I've included in this video that I've just pulled from the internet. The way that this definition differs is that it's compository rather than utilitarian. Now if we have a look at some of the other definitions of cities, we'll just have a look at this one here. A city is a center of population, commerce, and culture. So that's describing what the city does. We also have a city is an inhabited place of greater size, population, or importance than a town or village. That's more a descriptive thing. So what we have is descriptive and utility-based statements. This is what a city is for. This is what a city sort of looks like. But this definition from Latini is a compository statement. It's describing what a city is made up of. As the commentary on the Inferno goes on to say, a city, on this understanding, is not merely a marketplace or defensive stronghold, but the expression of common interest in rational values. So why do I think this is so important? Why, out of all the things I could have talked about today, am I talking about this? Well, when I look at what we're doing as a society, now of course this definition of a city comes from a time, 13th century Florence, when the civic model was the city-state model, whereas where you live in nation states. But the principle still applies. We can either think of this definition as a city or sort of society as a whole. We're not doing what this definition says, and I agree with this definition. I think, obviously this definition came about mainly due to historical necessity at the time, because those were more dangerous times back then, and people really did have to band up together because people were far more tribal. Now, we're less tribal nowadays, in the West at least. Other parts of the world still incredibly tribal. But looking at this definition, I can very confidently say that we're not doing this in our society, and what we're instead doing is something called multiculturalism. Now, multiculturalism explicitly states that we're gonna accept cultures, we're gonna let them come into our culture and do what they want. They can have their own cultural practices, their beliefs, their traditions, and that sort of thing. Now, the problem with this is that we're no longer living with the expressions of common interests and rational values, because obviously we have different groups with different beliefs of what even rationality might be. We have different religions, and it's all meshing together, and we're trying to make it work, and I don't think it works. I think that's what we're seeing around the West. We're seeing different groups coming into contact with each other, and it's producing conflict because we have different groups thinking of different ways society should be run, and we have to sort of figure out how to do that, and we can't appease both groups at once because they want entirely different things. Most of the time we can think of the treatment of women compared to from the Middle East to the West. You can't have both at once. You need to pick one or the other, and we can't do that within the context of multiculturalism. It's not politically correct, and we can't really talk about it because it's not considered politically correct. And it's also, in some countries like Australia, a legal problem to speak your mind. What I think this is all doing, this fixation on multiculturalism, on tolerance, on acceptance, is creating a weak society, a weak city, a weak nation, whatever term you want to put in there to fit your civic model. If we think about a lot of things in the world, they often have a correlation, a direct link between form and function, sort of structure and function, that sort of thing. Now, I'm thinking, of course, in terms of chemistry, because that's often where I heard this topic. If we think about two different substances, let's consider diamond and rubber. Now, the reason why these things have different functions within society, one is used for rubber bands and fittings around doors and that sort of thing, and the other one is used for obviously hard materials, cutting teeth, cutting rocks and that sort of thing. It's because they have different structures. Now, obviously the diamond, based on its molecular makeup, it's really strong. It's super freaking strong. It's really hard to break. So it is therefore able to go and cut rock, to cut teeth and that sort of thing, whereas rubber has a sort of sliding molecular structure, to put it simply, and it's able to stretch and that sort of thing. We can't use rubber to cut teeth based on its structure. It just can't happen. And if we apply this logic to a society, the function of the society will be an expression of its structure. Now, the structure of society is not unified in any sense because we're trying to do multiculturalism. We want to be able to have multiple groups doing multiple different things at the same time, not living with the expression of common interest and rational values in mind. Now, this is a problem because it's like, what is the function of our society? Can it perform in a harmonious, safe, and prosperous manner? I don't think it can. I think a society needs some form of basic unity. Now, I'm not advocating for, of course, collectivism where everyone sort of is the same, cookie cutter and that sort of thing. There is obviously individualism within even the most united society because we are individuals as humans. But what I'm thinking is that if we have people living together in close proximity who have wildly different ideas about how society should be run, how the world even operates, even on a very basic philosophical level, we can think of such things such as religion, that sort of thing, I don't think it's going to produce a harmonious, prosperous society. And I think that's what we're seeing nowadays with the conflicts that are rising in multicultural societies. And I think it's just going to get worse, obviously, as the issue isn't talked about and resentments grow and problems, swept under the carpet and they just grow because they're not talked about. Obviously, that's why we need freedom of speech more than ever, both in the legal sense and as a philosophical principle. So that's really what I wanted to get across today. We need to move away from the idea that we should define cities, define societies, define cultures even, based on utility. We're not just going to look at a city and say, oh, that's a city and it's just a center of population, of commerce, of culture, and that sort of thing. A city, a nation, is composed of people, individuals, groups, and how this city or nation will go about performing its commerce, how it will go about expressing its culture, how it will act as a population unit is dependent on its form. What are the groups that make up this city? What are the individuals that make up this nation? Are they united in the expression of interest in rational values? Are they looking to do the same thing, or are they divided? And if they are divided, I cannot say that we can live in a strong society, in a strong city, in a strong nation. Now, this may seem like a very strange and nuanced thing to talk about for nigh on 11 minutes, but it bears well to remember that the beginning of wisdom is calling things by their proper names. Now, obviously, within our societal group, within our nation, within our city, we want to spread wisdom. We want to create wisdom. We want to promulgate wisdom, because this obviously creates a safe and harmonious society. So if we want to create and sustain this safe and harmonious society, it does bear well to speak upon the definitions of very basic things, such as the definition of a city, lest we fall into strife and conflict. Thanks all for sticking around, and have a good one.